boss.
The boss.
Always the boss.
It's
Always the boss.
It's always the boss.
And everybody wants to be a boss.
I think a lot of managers don't really understand the kind of power that they have, and they don't know how to be responsible with that power.
The authority that does come with a role, the sort of a healthy authority, gets a bit lost. So these lines get crossed and people are not quite sure what to expect.
It wasn't always directly like of a sexual tone. It was really sort of emotional manipulation because I think he was maybe lonely.
How do we approach this when it becomes apparent that you're part of the problem?
If you have an entire clerical staff that is emotionally wrecked from working with this one individual, that's expensive. Is anyone that reports to you holding on to their job because financially they have to? Are you the reason that they would leave if they could?
If you fall into any of these categories, please do better.
Andrew, I got a big question for you. When people complain about their job, what is the thing they complain the most about?
Oh, ba-dum boom. The boss.
The boss.
Always the boss. Always the boss.
It's always the boss.
And everybody wants to be a boss. And nobody thinks
Funny.
about it. Yeah, it's true.
Funny,
Always the
people
boss.
work so hard to be that boss that then everybody complains about.
It is a bit of a funny twist, isn't it? Yeah.
We hear this so often. So often. It's even like we do a training, and at some point during any training, someone will say, why isn't the boss in here? They need to hear this. Right? Whatever we're training, the group wants the boss to know, to learn the lesson. There are some stats. So
give us your stats, Chuck.
Well, I just thought
Give
this
us
was
the
interesting. This is from an article in HR Dive. So they're looking at research. More than 70% of managers say they have great relationships and open communication with workers, and yet only 58% of employees would agree. So that's interesting. Like you have this disconnect.
Bit of a crude,
yeah.
It's a bit of a crude analogy, but it's like saying 70% of, parents say they have a great relationship with their kids, and only 30% of the kids agree or something, or whatever your number was, right?
Yes.
It's like what a disconnect.
Yes. So what is going on here? I mean, I certainly have a take that I think a lot of managers don't really understand the kind of power that they have, and they don't know how to be responsible with that power.
Yeah. And I think a lot of managers think they're doing great because no one's telling them they're not. They don't work in a culture where it's okay for them to learn that they're not. And I think the fourth ingredient is a lot of managers. I mean, this is humans in general, but obviously we're talking about bosses here. A lot of people can't read the room. So they look at a room full of quiet people who are nodding and they go, they really like me. We're good. And where someone like you or I might be standing at the side of the room, or one of our colleagues, and we be going like, wow, that's a room full of terrified people who are nodding along out of fear. And I've seen it. I know you've seen it. So yeah, I think so. Some of it, I think, is just, not being able to actually read the room, making assumptions and not being curious about what's actually happening.
It's interesting. That example makes me think of a question we get all the time from managers in our trainings, which is, I've tried some of these techniques on this one employee, and I just get like one word answers from this person. They seem like they're like a brick wall. They're just really hard to communicate with. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with this person who's only giving me one word answers and I can't get through to them? I'm like, are you looking in the right place for where the problem might be? Maybe if someone's only giving you one word answers, they're terrified of you or angry at you and you don't know.
Or they don't like being an experiment.
Well, there's that too, because people come out of our training like, I'm going to use all these skills on you. And and the employee's like, No, I don't want you to talk to me like this. I just want you to talk to me like a person.
So that's a pretty hard statistic. Was it 70 to 40, 70 to
70 to
50?
58. So it's not the biggest gap, but it's it's a good 12-point gap. That's significant.
Well, it's sad because that's 12 percentage points of those people who are going home struggling, unhappy, probably not having the best dinner conversations with the people around them because they're stressed or struggling.
I think some of it is to understand what are the issues. And I think a lot of it is to have managers take more responsibility for their authority. That's a big one. That and it's an awkward thing. A lot of managers, especially here in the US, I think a lot of managers want to be your buddy and they don't want to be your boss. And call me by my first name, call me by my nickname. And there's a lot of very casualness that comes into the picture. Like, I don't want to be the typical boss. But then they may be unconscious to the authority that they do have. And they may be really not paying attention to when they're abusing it by accident. I do think a lot of this is inadvertent. I don't think people mean to be the nightmare boss. I think some of that may be old school management. You and I've talked about this in other conversations. Like, if we're not leading through fear, we're not leading effectively. That's the old school way of doing this. But
yeah, I think it's fair to say. I would definitely add, despite our playful cynicism, I think most people don't intend to be bad bosses. I think it's just a lack of awareness and a lack of a culture or a structure that enables conversations when people are not doing great, right? So I would agree with you. I don't think most people mean it. So like you said, in America, it's mostly like, I want to be your buddy. I guess, in the UK, it's I want to be your mate. Like, I want to be your mate. Let's go for a pint after work or whatever. But yeah, that sort of wanting to sort of fit in and be accessible, and sometimes the authority that does come with a role, the sort of a healthy authority, gets a bit lost, and so these lines get crossed, and people are not quite sure what to expect.
Yeah, and lines getting crossed, I think, is part of the picture too. I'm thinking about a friend of mine had this issue with her workplace over a number of years. The company was run by two guys. It was kind of a startup. And at one point, one of the guys brought in his girlfriend to run the HR department. Now, if you have an issue with that guy and you need to lodge a complaint, you're lodging the complaint with his girlfriend. So that's awkward. Again, that's like people who are maybe unconscious to the kind of power that they have and the effect of that power. There's more.
Well, yeah. Well, what you're reminding me of a client I worked with, and this one is a little bit more sinister, but sort of similar structure. This was a multinational. It wasn't a sort of friends startup kind of situation, but the client was the head of HR, sat on the executive committee, and her boss was from a more dominant culture, let's say, and he was also harassing her. So he's the country head. He's harassing her, and her reporting line for sexual harassment cases or bullying goes through him. And there was a sort of a like an emergency switch that she could pull to go around him to a regional head or something. But the first thing that happens is the heads of all the countries get notified, and he was the head of one of the countries. So it was almost like you could just sort of see this. And what was sinister here, this was a really shocking story, actually. He knew this. And he took sort of comfort, I would say comfort, but he took cover in the fact that it was a bit of a circular situation. And, there you have a story which plays itself out, I'm sure, every day in the world still, where people are choosing to leave jobs because that's the easiest way to handle this. So the loser is the victim here. So that's a bit more of a sinister story and setup, but I think it points to some of the structures where people get to behave badly because they know they can get away with it, right?
Well, and I remember hearing some of the stories about this individual you're talking about, and so some of what was creepy was the way that he used the power that he had. It wasn't always directly like, like of a sexual tone. It was really sort of emotional manipulation, because I think he was maybe lonely or felt emotionally isolated. So there would be this like, I need you to stay late tonight. And not because work needed to be done, but because he didn't want to be alone.
Yeah.
This stuff like that, right? Or like, like, can we meet up for a drink after work? Not because he was like doing, like, he wasn't getting handsy or anything with her, but again, because he wanted some female company. And right. So the emotional neediness, it's almost like a little boy who's sort of like walking into this very powerful role and doesn't quite understand the impact he's having.
Yeah. And I think maturity, emotional intelligence is a big key theme that we would see in a lot of these sort of difficult bosses situation, right? It's like there's a lack of awareness, but also a lack of interest in having any awareness. And so occasionally it comes from a really dark place, but mostly it's just immaturity and lack of development.
Yeah. And meanwhile, they think that everyone else needs to be developed. So oftentimes when we'll pitch these programs, and they'll be, oh yeah, my whole team needs this. My whole team needs this. Well, what about you? Yeah, the team needs this. And I'm looking at this leader and I'm thinking, I bet you could benefit from this training too. Oh, no. It's better if I'm not there. Yeah, it's better if you're not there, because you might find out something about yourself.
Well, it's one of my favorite questions. You know this, you've heard me say this, but it doesn't work with everyone. And I don't always feel like the relationship is strong enough to hold it. But one of my favorite questions is, how do we approach this when it becomes apparent that you're part of the problem?
Yeah. I mean,
what do we do then?
We do try to have these conversations with whoever's hiring us, because oftentimes they are part of the problem. Sometimes because they're part of the system that's causing the harm. And sometimes it's because they're unconscious to their impact, to how much they're actually causing some of the problems. Definitely.
Luckily, we have lots of clients who go, don't worry, that'll never happen because I'm not part of the problem.
No, it won't.
No, I'm joking. We love our clients.
Just that same story I was sharing about the guy who hired his girlfriend. So at a certain other point in my friend's journey in the same company, this guy hired a friend of his for the job that my friend was going to be promoted into. So she'd been in the company for years. She was on her way to this particular promotion. This guy who is a buddy of one of the owners gets brought in for that job. She doesn't know why, because he doesn't understand the role. She's like, I think the only reason he was picked is because he's a friend of the owner and he's a guy. Because there wasn't anything else that would seem to qualify him for that role. He wasn't good in it. And then she had to report to him. And she helped him a lot, because what else is she going to do? So this is where this guy may have been a jerk boss, but it wouldn't have been his fault. It was the person who hired him that I think really messed up.
You mentioned something before about the systems, right? The system that's in place, or the culture, the system culture. And I think that's a great example of one. He's not necessarily a bad guy, but he's been put in a role where the system allows that to happen. And I think we see that a lot too. I know that one of our other clients is, like a lot of multinationals these days, they struggle with making sure that people have clear messaging about behavior, about what's expected of them, and so on and so on. But inevitably, every now and again, we'll bump into people who are having these incidents with people who are not doing what the culture is expecting them to do. So company says, equality and equity, every voice matters. Meanwhile, here comes a boss who's been promoted for whatever reason and is a bit of a bully. And I've, in the last year, coached people on this topic too. And one in particular comes to mind. Successful person in terms of deliverables, I would say on any measure that you and I would give, very unsuccessful in terms of humanizing in the workplace. They've got a reputation for being very dismissive, very aggressive, but the system allows it. The system, quote unquote, is fine because the deliverables are okay, even though, and again, this is an HR situation, the HR director is aware of several people coming in tears, several people feeling bullied, people going off on burnout, but the deliverables are there. So the system says it's a calculated situation. We don't really like it. We'll try to remind him, but we have results. So it's essentially saying, please don't cry too loud.
Well, there, and
please
this
don't
is,
make a scene.
Yeah, this is something that I've certainly seen. You have the classic example of a law firm where one of the associates or even one of the partners is bringing in a lot of business and winning a lot of cases, doing extraordinarily profitable work for the firm and destroying everybody that they work with. So, especially if you have like a smaller organization, if you have an entire clerical staff that is emotionally wrecked from working with this one individual, that's expensive. You have a lot of people taking sick days. You have a lot of people, submitting resumes to other companies because they can't hack it. And meanwhile, they're like, well, this guy's bringing in a lot of money. We're doing really well because of, and a lot of really bad behavior gets tolerated. I would see this happen.
Wait, did you say sick?
Yeah.
Did you say sick days? Like this is a culture that says, please be in by 9 tomorrow.
Right.
We hope you'll be back in the morning. Right.
Oh yeah. But that's sometimes the only break that people get from this kind of abuse is they pretend that they have a doctor's appointment just to get a break from this jerk boss who is impossible to work with and who nobody's going to do anything about because they are the rainmaker. They are making the firm a lot of money. This is not a new situation. I saw it in entertainment as well. You have these producers, directors, actors who are bringing in the box office, and the behavior is off the charts. There were these legendary stories of producers and agents throwing coffee mugs at their assistants. Like, you'd hear this, right? Now it would be a lawsuit, but yeah. But
I was going to say, it's just like in the movies, but it really was in the movies, right?
It really was, yeah.
So I noticed we've sort of, we've gone down a pathway here of looking at like, the sort of the nasty, sinister jerk bosses. I'm also mindful that there's plenty of just slightly not brilliant kind of people who are not sort of nasty, but just kind of annoying. I was thinking about, I was working with somebody recently who was telling me that she's struggling and sort of heading for burnout, not because her boss is nasty or anything like that, but it just seems to be kind of, trying to think of a word that we could say in a recording. He seems a bit vacant.
As in not so smart or not present or?
Yeah. His IQ is definitely in the, I don't want to say single digits, but he's not in the territory you would expect for somebody. Of course, I can't name the organization, but given the position we're talking about, he's a very, very senior person, and I'd be hearing these stories like he sort of tells everybody in a meeting, like he delegates, right? But it's almost like he's heard or he's read a book that says you should delegate to the the next level of staff, who are still very senior people, but who are like, go figure this out. And I want this on my desk by Friday. And my client would be going, okay, how do you want it presented? And he's like, no, I'm giving you autonomy. I want it presented on my desk on Friday. Okay. Do you want, stop wasting my time. I just want it on my desk on Friday. So what do you think happens on Friday when it gets put on his desk?
Maybe he doesn't like it.
He does not like it.
Yeah.
He does not like it. And it's become this, it's like Groundhog Day. It is whatever angle this poor soul tries with this boss who's determined to say, I'm empowering you, because he's read a book or been on a training or something. I want you to have autonomy. He's probably read that somewhere too. And then he's frustrated because the deliverables are far below his expectations, but he just won't share his expectations.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it would be comical if it wasn't so draining for this poor person I'm working with. And I'm listening to this and my jaw is dropping because we know that particular organization well. We know how much they invest in people. They are extraordinarily caring. And yet, somewhere, somehow, this person is wandering around with more power than they know, or maybe they do know they have the power, but they're wielding it in a very unhealthy way. And that's just an example of a sort of, I want to say, jerk boss light. I don't think it's mean. I don't think it's bullying, but it's just kind of ridiculous.
Oh yeah. Well, so what it makes me think of is the psychological principle of, in general, people have a hard time understanding their own preferences. And it could very well be that this guy doesn't really know what he wants until he sees what he doesn't want. Right?
Mm.
Right. And then, oh, okay, well, I didn't want that. So now I know what I want. Or now I know something about what I want, but I didn't know, I wasn't able to articulate it before. And I think it kind of points to something I believed for a long time about this, which is whatever the psychological dysfunction of the boss is, that psychological dysfunction defines the entire workforce that reports to that person. Whatever
Yep.
that person's deficiencies are, whether they're like emotionally needy or, in denial about this or whatever, everybody who works for them, and maybe the entire reporting line underneath them, is affected by that deficiency. So
100%.
part of what this points to is, if you are in a position of authority in any organization, like, get your act together psychologically. If you think you're good and you're perfect, you're probably not. Like, deal with your stuff because it's
Mm.
hurting people.
It makes me think of something I heard from a really good friend of mine recently. He's just left his company, and he was brilliant. He had a pretty senior role. Clients loved him. The people he worked with loved him. You could just tell this guy is like heart and soul humanized. Like he gets this. And he left because his boss wasn't interested in helping him grow.
Mm.
And this was the kind of person who could say, with all the humility that it deserved, he would be like, when I've become the smartest person in the room and nobody wants to grow me, I got to go find something else.
Yeah.
There's nothing for me to learn here, and I'm being learned from, which is great, but nobody's interested in growing me. And so that's more that sort of that slightly immature, unevolved kind of leadership that he's dealing with there. Like, they mean well, they're just not really interested, and they've lost an extraordinary asset, and he wants to not be the smartest person in the room. And I think that's really healthy from a leadership perspective, right? Because he's got a team, he's leading them, but he's kind of maxed out because no
Yeah.
one's teaching him anything new. So,
Well, it does remind me of one of our earlier conversations about how messed up incentives are inside of companies. And if you're not able to offer a trajectory of development to everybody, then there's something wrong, because all human beings want to grow. And when they don't grow, they get stagnant, stuck, burned out, etc. And this is what happens.
yeah, people need something else to motivate them, for sure.
I was thinking about, so when I was doing my IT work, I didn't have a boss per se. I had a lot of clients, and I would walk into a lot of offices. And so I would get a sense of what people were dealing with every time their boss interacted with me, because I was the help. And how do you treat the help? I'm the computer guy. I'm here to fix the server, or I'm here to, plug in this new device or something. How do you treat the help? And I was treated in so many different ways by so many different people. There were times when I felt like, oh, this is a cool place to be. I like the vibe here. I like how everybody is treated. There were other places where I dreaded walking in because if the boss was there, I knew that I would be given a hard time. So I'll tell you one story in particular that I probably will never forget. So dealing with this boss who's, I'm not going to say, but who is a fairly prominent individual. And he's got a Mac computer. And I'm standing in front of him with it, and he's pointing to some issues and some things he doesn't understand. He wants me to explain, and he points to the lower right corner of the screen. He says, "What is this?" So
before you continue, I just,
yes.
in case anyone's listening to this rather than watching it, I want you to know that I'm slightly holding my breath because I think I know where this story is going to go, and it's kind of outrageous. I just want to say I'm sort of sitting here with tension as this story is building. Okay, Chuck, he looks at the bottom of the screen, he points to the bottom of the screen, and
he's like, "What is this?" And I say, "Oh, that's the trash can. That's for deleting documents and for deleting things." And he says, "Well, it's unsightly, and I'd like it removed."
I know.
Right. And so I'm thinking, of course, he says this to me. I'm like, oh, crap. What do I do? What do I do? It's like, oh, well, okay. So it's part of the operating system. So it can't be removed. Oh, you're telling me you actually don't have the skill to remove it. I'm like, oh, I am not a programmer. I can't. No. And he says, well, I'd like it removed. So if you can't remove it for me, you need to get me someone who can. And
ouch.
I walked away from that going like, wow, like this is me spending like 10 minutes with this guy. Imagine if I were a full-time worker in that office and that was a psychology that I was exposed to every day. What kind of a mess would I be if that was my boss?
I mean, of course, the only thing that would be worse than like having to work with him would be being part of his family.
I'm not going to say anything.
One of his
disappointing.
Imagine being one of his disappointing children, or his underperforming partner. Oh my goodness, what an awful thing to experience. And yeah, you're right. Like the psychological torture that it must be to work with someone who has that level of contempt for the people around them.
There was no
and of course,
space.
We know this stuff happens. Right?
No, of course, there was no space for me to explain anything to him. He was not like a lot of my work at the time was educating people about their computer, about how it worked. He was not open to that. So he was convinced that he was right, that the only good Mac is a Mac without a trash can on the screen. And that was what he was going to get because he could afford to make that happen. I don't know that anyone ever did that for him, but I
feel like you might have missed a business opportunity there to create a Mac without a trash can on the bottom of the screen. But
yeah.
I mean, look, this is the stuff I know. In one of our recent episodes, we were talking about people losing motivation at work, and these are the kinds of stories that make people, if they're lucky, they just quietly find something else and move on.
Yes.
If they're unlucky, they go to burnout or have mental health breakdowns and exhaustion, which it's kind of ironic because we live in a world which is much more accepting of mental health needs and so on today, but also then you also see more of it. But I was thinking about my friend I referenced in a recent episode of ours where he was telling me, like, he said, I'm doing my quiet quitting. I was like, oh, what did you do? And he said, sort of conspirationally, he's like, I left my work phone on my desk. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, it's such a simple thing, right? But it's like, here's someone who's been devoted to the organization for, I don't know, 15 years or so. A real trooper, working really hard, and has become demotivated by some of the similar stories that we're talking about here. And his way of taking back some power is, he has his personal phone, but the organization, he has a very specific work device, which is always with him. and he started leaving it on his desk when he's not working.
Yeah.
And such a small thing, but that's the quiet quitting happening in the background for a lot of people when they're unfortunate enough to work for people who don't have or aren't interested in trying to do better. So.
Well, and also it just makes me think of like all the examples of what they call malicious compliance, where people like, yeah, I'll follow your rule and you'll regret it. Right. There are people who are kind of acting out. There's a lot of things we see on X or Instagram or TikTok where people are saying, here's how I got back at my boss. But I think most workers are not going to do that. I think many workers at least, are staying in their job because financially they have to. And so this is the question I would put forth, like, as we wrap the conversation for now. This is what the question I would put forth to anyone listening who supervises people. Is anyone that reports to you holding on to their job because financially they have to? Are you the reason that they would leave if they could?
Yep, it's a big question. Here's a twist. Are you the kind of boss that people work for and they say, what's your plan for retirement? And the employee goes, don't worry, boss, I will work until noon on the day of my funeral. Right. If you fall into any of these categories, please do better.
Mm-hmm. Please do better. Please do better. People do, they want to do well. Most people want to show up and do their jobs well. Most people want to, if you are a boss, most people do want to please you. And maybe they don't know how because you haven't let them know.
Yep. Here's your homework, leaders and friends. Check it out. Do people enjoy working for you? Are they happy to come in? Or as Chuck said, are you the reason they would leave if they could? If so, there's probably an opportunity for you there.
Yes. And if you do have a boss who is wonderful, let us know, because we would love to tell some of those stories too. We don't hear them that often, but we'd love to hear more of those stories.
But I think that there's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Right? The champion bosses or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Chucky, it's been fun having this conversation with you.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Stay well.
Stay safe.
Stay human.